So Tuesday on television, there was a newscaster who was interviewing a woman who had been present in 2015 when there was a massacre in a church in Charleston, South Carolina. Dylan Roof, who was 21 years old at the time, had come to the church. He went to the Bible study. During the Bible study, he got up and he killed 9 of the people who were there. There were 3 survivors. So they were interviewing this one, and she said she was under a table. And Roof came over to her and said, have I shot you yet? And she said, no. And he said, well, I'm not going to. And he turned around and he left the church. How do you forgive somebody like that? You know, the interviewer said to this woman, it has been told to me that you forgive this man and that you are trying to get into the prison to minister to him. And she said, yes, that's right. How do you do that? You know, as I listened to this, it reminded me of this book I have on forgiveness. And the book starts out talking about this man who was tortured and killed by apartheid in South Africa. And his wife and children forgave those who had tortured and killed him. And she seemed surprised that people would think that she hadn't forgiven. How do you do that? Today in the lessons we heard about the temptation of Eve and how she gave in to the temptation and she ate from the fruit. We hear about the temptations of Jesus and how he resisted the temptations and then went on with his ministry. But I think there's a time when we have to talk about the temptations that we have. And I think one of the biggest temptations we have is to not forgive, because we're forgiven. You know, it's said in that epistle lesson that our sins are covered. God looks at us and he sees the righteousness of Christ. So why should we forgive? There was a shooting in an Amish school a few years ago in Pennsylvania, and several of the children were killed, and then the shooter killed himself. They were interviewing one of the mothers of one of the children and who had been killed. And they said to her, how can you forgive this man? And her answer was, how can I not? You know, Jesus said that we have to forgive. And so I do. I have no choice. And she talked about how she would forgive, and 5 minutes later she would have to forgive again and again and again. But she persisted because Jesus said we should do it. And she said she had no choice. Do we have a choice? You know, I've heard a lot of people say, and I've said it myself, I confess to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have said, I know I should forgive, but in this case, God would understand. True. But the words are still there that tell us that as Jesus people, we are to forgive. How do you do that? How do you forgive someone who comes in to your church where you're having Bible study and being good people and kills your friends? How do you forgive someone who has tortured and killed the person that you love more than anyone else in the world? How do you forgive someone who comes in and kills your children, for heaven's sakes? And the fact of the matter is we can't. And I think that's where we fall short. We can't forgive. It's only with God working forgiveness in us that we are able to reach out and forgive those who have hurt us most. And I guess the question before us today is, have you been hurt badly? Have you forgiven? And if you have not, is it because you have refused to allow God to work that forgiveness in you? The alternative is to carry a grudge, to let that anger seethe within you, that disappointment, that hurt, to grow and to destroy you while doing nothing to the person who has hurt you. Jesus is very wise in the things that he says. God is very wise when he calls us to be a forgiving people. He doesn't say it's going to be easy, but it's going to make life better. I appreciated that Amish woman saying, Jesus told me to do it. I have no choice. Maybe this Lenten season is a time when we need to think about that temptation to not forgive, that temptation to hold grudges, that temptation to keep anger within us. Maybe it's a time when we need to ask God to work that forgiveness in us that only God can work. Because from a human point of view, I can't forgive people who kill my children, or my best friends, or my husband. But God can. With God, all things are possible. And it is with God's help, with God's action, that we can forgive. And we must.